Coming up, International Football tonight, 7:45 on Friday. Commentary of Wales and Belgium in their qualifying match. So build-up starts from 7. Now, a little earlier, I did mention the beneficial impact that partners had on, in particular, men's diets. To put it in a sexist way, get married and save your life. It's good for you. So I asked for examples of what marriage or partnership had done to people, what the partners done. I suggested for a start, it meant that some men ate their regular takeaway at least with a knife and fork rather than with bare hands. That was one beneficial impact. This from Millie. When I met my partner, says Millie, he used to squirt mayonnaise on all his meals, even Christmas dinner if I'd allowed it. He used to pile his food up on his plate and mix it all up like a slurry, and he'd eat food from anywhere. I've known him retrieve food from bins when we've been camping. And eventually he now has mayo with salad, and he doesn't bin dive, and he cuts his food up and eats it like a real grown-up. At home, anyway. I did catch him making a sarnie last week for work. Tara masalata, pork and pate. Bless him. Does that ring a bell with you? My diet got much better after I became single. My ex-partner was forever buying chocolate and biscuits. I couldn't resist them once they were in the house. Now I'm single. I don't buy them. Problem solved. Waistline decreasing, says James in South London. Let's speak to Andrew. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, what's your story?
Well, I'm a married man with 2 kids, 10 and 8, and we all have a fairly healthy and active lifestyle. Our diet would be pretty good. But I have to say, my wife would have the meals well planned. Plenty of emphasis on fruit and veg. And sadly, I think if it was left to me, I think the dinners might become a bit more convenient, maybe less healthy, and I'd say that probably weekend treats would probably dramatically increase.
Well, this is a sad story, Andrew. You're effectively saying you're just a weak, useless male and you need a woman to tell you what to do.
Well, I'm useful in other areas, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess there's something about partnership, isn't there, which actually makes you, I suspect it has a beneficial effect on both sides in that you sort of keep your standards up a bit because there's somebody there watching what you do, and there's nothing like that to stop you behaving badly.
Yeah, there is. There would be occasions, where certain things where both of us may have a tendency to slip on the other one's there, to say, no, we need to do things in a certain way, and keep, as you say, keep the standards up.
Righto, thank you for that. Might have a chat to Emily Grundy now. She's a professor of demography, London School of Economics, and one of the authors of this report which suggested that married men were in better health than their single counterparts. Although the research rather interestingly suggested that single women were healthier than married women. So women marry and apparently it doesn't necessarily help their health. They also found that getting divorced didn't have a harmful impact. Anyway, we'll get the facts from Emily. Hi, Emily. Nice to speak to you.
Hello.
Yeah, good morning to you. So give us some of the headlines of what you discovered here.
Right. Well, this study's sort of done more than previous studies because it's based on one of the UK's birth cohorts, which follows everybody up from a sample who were born 1 week in 1958. So we were able to look at their partnership histories over a long phase of adult life up to their mid-40s. And the other sort of innovation was that instead of just relying on reports of how people rated their health, as done in lots of earlier studies, blood samples and physical measurements were taken.
You really did it properly. This is not anecdotal. This is proven, is it?
Well, yes, it's based. There is a problem, obviously, when people report their health, that there can be differences, in, according to how they feel or things like this. This is based on, if you like, blood samples and specific analyses of measures which are known to be linked to risks of death and various health problems. And the other thing is that because this follows up people from birth, we can take into account some of their childhood circumstances, because we know that things like how your health in childhood or whatever might influence your marriage prospect and your later life health. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. And so I suppose some of the things that were different from this study in terms of results from previous studies was, first of all, it seemed that those who got divorced or separated, it wasn't a long-term disadvantage, provided they got into a new partnership.
Partnership is good for you, is it? I mean,
yes,
mentally and on medically, if you like, it does you good.
Yes, but it's not the end of the world, it appears, if you split up, as long as you form a new relationship, and that's a bit different from some of the previous findings.
Sorry, go on.
We also found that people who were cohabiting rather than legally married, there didn't seem to be much of a difference between the sort of married and the cohabiting. And again, that's a bit different from previous studies, but it may just be that cohabitation's become much more kind of usual now than in the past.
Yeah. Is that because it's a natural state of affairs for people to live in a social way? I mean, I wonder what the impact will be when it's a whole family. Maybe that's just the way we should live.
Well, that's an interesting thing you mentioned. I mean, I was interested in what your callers have been saying, and your comment on living with someone keeps your standards up, and that's sort of basically partners do play an important role in providing support, emotional support, and keeping an eye on, you talked about food, but it's also, smoking, drinking,
could be 101,
exercise.
101 bad habits, which you simply wouldn't do if there was somebody watching you. That's the truth of the matter.
You mentioned the social control, social things, and it's true because other research has also suggested that people who have children tend to be, better off in later life in terms of health than those that don't. So there are a whole range of things, and the difference between men and women, although this needs a bit more looking into, and but probably this may be to do with the fact that women often have other sources of social support. Men tend to rely very much on their partner, whereas women often have stronger links with friends and other relatives.
That's another very interesting topic I'd like to deal with one day. Thank you, Emily. Nice to speak to you. Have a quick word with Harry. Yeah, bye. Have a quick word with Harry Benson, Marriage Foundation. So there we are, Harry. Marriage is good for you.
Yes, well, it certainly is good for you. This study actually really shows, it's an excellent study. It looks at 10,000 people born in 1958, as you may have just heard. I didn't hear all of the last person's comments. But there's certainly some evidence that people seem to do better in terms of their health in all sorts of different ways. But it's not really health that's the issue with marriage, and that's not why people get married. It's not the reason why marriage is important. The reason why it's important is because it affirms the commitment that couples make to one another that helps them stay together, and that works to the advantage of children. We did some work on
Why should people need marriage to have a commitment?
Well, they don't need to at all, but commitment is all about making decisions to be a couple with a future.
Yeah.
And you can do that perfectly well as an unmarried couple, and a minority of people do. But they are the exception. We did some work on parents who had got 15-year-old children, and this was about 1,800, I think we looked at, so it was a smaller sample in this study. And we found that a quarter of those who had married before they had kids split up by the time their kids were 15, compared to two-thirds of the unmarried couples. There's an enormous gap between those who marry and those who don't marry, and even those who marry later, actually, in terms of who stays together and who doesn't. And it definitely seems to be the case that staying together is the thing. And one of the interesting
It might be that different sort of people decide to get married, that maybe that sense of commitment is there in the first place.
Well, that's right, and that's quite possible. If people are deciders more than sliders, if they make decisions about things and buy into things, then people tend to stick at stuff. And maybe that's part of our character. But that's also something that you can do. And people get married. After all, go back 40, 50 years, and pretty well everybody who had babies got married. So we're all capable of it. And divorce rates were an awful lot lower then than they are now. We're all capable of making decisions about the future. Okay. The question is, do we do it? But getting married is still incredibly important, just not for health, but for staying together for your children's sake.
Harry, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
I don't know whether I should put a word in for divorce. Oh, yeah, I will, right. I was fit and healthy. I got married, I got fat and miserable. I got divorced, I got fit and happy again. You need to look at whether marriage makes you happy or not, says John in Norwich. And when we talk about the increasing rate of divorce, maybe in the past a lot of people stayed and put up with miserable marriages. That also may be true. Nothing makes me happier than feeding my husband, says Jackie from Wolverhampton. His diet is probably better with me there, but he eats more, and I'm a bit of a feeder. There is that kind of maternal instinct that if a man is sitting there to feed him makes him happy. Oh my God, totally sexist attitudes. My God, it's the old-fashioned men at work again, says Laura. Why are you listening to this programme long enough to know what to expect by now, Laura? It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Good morning.
First for breaking news and the best live sport.
This is BBC 5 Live.
Good morning, this is Pete Allen.